learn how to spell his name, it correctly says Jonathan. How about you go up on Google and look how to spell Jonathan the correct way? I just didn't want to tattoo like everybody else. But you know what? I'm going to...
Never mind, he's not watching.
My man loves it, and I'm not fighting for no spot, because you shouldn't have to fight for a spot.
This was supposed to be a throwaway comment, a casual correction, a blink-and-you-miss-it moment that should have died quietly in the comment section. Instead, it detonated like a verbal landmine and dragged an entire family into another internet firestorm. Because the moment Nevaeh opened her mouth and said the Blueface tattoo wasn't spelled wrong, Karlissa didn't just respond. She clapped back with intent, and suddenly the timeline was on fire. What should have been a harmless tattoo clarification turned into a full-scale loyalty test. A credibility war and another chapter in the never-ending Blueface universe where nothing stays small and nobody stays quiet. The internet leaned in instantly, because when family members start correcting each other publicly, it's never about ink. It's about pride, control, and who gets to rewrite history. Karlissa wasn't about to let the narrative slide. Not today. Not on her watch. Her reaction wasn't calm, it wasn't subtle, and it definitely wasn't private. It came with energy, emotion, and that unmistakable tone of someone who feels challenged on a public stage. And once she spoke, the conversation shifted from spelling errors to something much deeper. Because in this family, even a tattoo can turn into a battleground. And once this back and forth started, there was no turning the volume down. What followed made the Kardashians look like they handled disagreements through email drafts and meditation apps. What started as a simple correction turned into a full-blown family standoff faster than anyone expected. Nevaeh didn't raise her voice. She didn't drag it out. She simply said the Blueface tattoo wasn't spelled wrong. And that single sentence cracked open a door that should have stayed shut. In this family, nothing exists in isolation. And no comment lives without consequences. The moment those words left her mouth, the internet leaned forward. Because everyone knew Karlissa wasn't the type to let a public narrative shift without responding. Karlissa's clap back wasn't accidental or impulsive. It carried the weight of someone who has watched too many stories get twisted for entertainment. To her, this wasn't a harmless clarification. It was a challenge to a version of events that had already been cemented in public opinion. When people spend months laughing, mocking, and speculating, a sudden correction doesn't feel like truth. It feels like revision. And Karlissa wasn't about to let that revision happen quietly. The energy behind her response said more than the words themselves. This wasn't playful banter or casual disagreement. It was defensive, sharp, and laced with frustration that had clearly been building long before this moment. You could hear it in the tone, the emphasis, the way she framed her response. This wasn't just about ink on skin. This was about authority, about who gets to speak, and about who bears the fallout when the internet runs wild with half stories. Tattoos in this situation aren't just body art. They're receipts. They're symbols of loyalty, eras, and decisions that people later tried to downplay or rewrite. The idea that the tattoo wasn't spelled wrong threatened a long-running joke that had already become part of the public's understanding of the story. When jokes harden into facts online, correcting them feels like an attack rather than a clarification. Karlissa's reaction reflected that tension perfectly. What made it escalate so quickly was how personal it felt. Nevaeh's comment didn't come from a stranger. It came from inside the circle. Family corrections hit differently because they carry implications about who knows the truth and who's been misleading people, intentionally or not. Karlissa's clap back made it clear she felt that line had been crossed. And once family dynamics spill into public view, there's no easy way to contain them. The internet immediately split into camps. One side praised Nevaeh for keeping it real and correcting misinformation, arguing that truth should matter more than viral narratives. The other side defended Karlissa, saying family issues shouldn't be aired publicly and that Nevaeh should have known the reaction her comment would spark. Neutrality disappeared instantly, replaced by loud opinions and endless commentary from people who had never met either of them. Karlissa's frustration wasn't just about this one moment. It felt cumulative. Years of being pulled into Blueface-related drama. Years of watching private matters become public jokes. years of feeling like every word gets twisted the moment it hits the timeline. Her clapback carried that history. It wasn't polished, and it wasn't meant to be. It was raw, reactive, and clearly fueled by exhaustion. Nevaeh, meanwhile, found herself at the center of a storm she may not have anticipated. A statement meant to correct a detail suddenly became a referendum on loyalty and respect. Online, people questioned her motives, her timing, and whether she should have spoken at all. That's the danger of public corrections in a family already under scrutiny. Even truth gets interrogated for intent. As clips and screenshots spread, context evaporated. Karlissa's response was chopped into sound bites. Nevaeh's original comment was replayed without nuance. The situation flattened into a binary conflict where complexity had no room to breathe. Karlissa was labeled dramatic by some and protective by others. Nevaeh was painted as honest or messy depending on who was telling the story. What's striking is how predictable it all was. In this ecosystem, nothing stays small. A comment becomes a confrontation. A correction becomes a clap back. And once emotions enter the frame, the internet treats it like a live show rather than a family disagreement. The speed at which this escalated wasn't shocking. It was expected. By the end of this phase, it was clear the issue had moved far beyond spelling. It had become about control over the narrative and who gets to define reality when millions are watching. Karlissa wasn't just responding to Nevaeh. She was responding to the internet, to the jokes, to the assumptions, and to the constant pressure of being pulled into conversations she didn't start, and with reactions multiplying and outsiders jumping in. The situation was already shifting from disagreement to spectacle. Because once the internet smells division, it doesn't step back. It amplifies. And this was only the beginning of how far this tattoo drama was about to spiral. The moment Karlissa's response started circulating, the internet did what it does best. It exaggerated, escalated, and turned a family disagreement into a full-blown digital coliseum where everyone picked a side and started throwing tomatoes. This wasn't discussion anymore. This was sport. Screenshots flew faster than context could keep up. And suddenly, a tattoo detail had transformed into a referendum on loyalty, honesty, and who was allowed to correct whom in public. Memes were the first wave. Because humor is the internet's favorite way to avoid accountability. People joked that the tattoo had more plot twists than a Netflix thriller. Others claimed the letters deserved their own press conference. Laughing emojis filled comment sections, but beneath the jokes was something sharper. People weren't just laughing at the situation. They were laughing at the family dynamic, at the tension, and at the idea that something so small could cause such a loud explosion. Then came the takes, and they were ruthless. Some accused Nevaeh of clout chasing, saying there was no reason to correct the spelling publicly unless attention was the goal. Others argued Karlissa was overreacting, turning a factual correction into unnecessary drama. Both sides spoke with absolute certainty, as if they had been present when the tattoo was designed, inked, and discussed behind closed doors. The confidence was loud even when the facts were thin. Reaction channels jumped in almost immediately because nothing feeds engagement like family conflict. Titles grew more dramatic by the hour. Thumbnails screamed betrayal, clapbacks, and exposed narratives that stretched the truth until it barely resembled reality. Each retelling added another layer of distortion, pushing the story further away from what actually happened and deeper into entertainment territory. At that point, the chaos wasn't just happening. It was being monetized. What really poured gasoline on the fire was how quickly people rewrote the story to fit their preferred villain. For some, Karlissa became the symbol of control, someone unwilling to let younger voices speak freely. For others, Nevaeh was framed as disruptive, stepping out of line and airing family business for the world to see. The middle ground vanished completely. Nuance doesn't trend, but conflict does. Celebrity-adjacent commentary added another dimension. Subtle likes, vague reposts, and cryptic captions appeared across timelines, all hinting at opinions without owning them. Quotes about knowing when to stay quiet competed with posts about speaking your truth no matter who gets uncomfortable. each one felt aimed even if no names were mentioned. The indirectness only made things messier because everyone filled in the blanks with their own assumptions. Karlissa's clap back began to be dissected line by line. Tone became the focal point instead of substance. People argued about how she said it rather than why she said it. Her frustration was labeled aggression by some and protection by others. The original point, whether the tattoo was actually spelled wrong or not, faded into the background. At that stage, accuracy didn't matter. Perception did. Nevaeh's silence during this phase became its own controversy. Some interpreted it as maturity, choosing not to escalate further. Others saw it as avoidance or guilt. Silence online is never neutral. It invites projection. It invites projection. Every hour without a response gave people more room to invent motives, emotions, and intentions that may or may not have existed. In the absence of clarity, speculation filled the gap. The comment sections grew harsher as time passed. What began as debate turned into personal attacks. People questioned character, upbringing, and family loyalty. Strangers spoke as if they had a stake in the outcome, as if the spelling of a tattoo somehow affected their lives directly. That's the strange power of internet drama. It convinces people they're part of the story, even when they're just spectators. As the frenzy peaked, the issue stopped being about a tattoo altogether. It became a symbol of something bigger. Control versus correction. Privacy versus transparency. Family unity versus public truth. Everyone saw their own experiences reflected in the argument, which made the reactions even more intense. People weren't just responding to Karlissa and Nevaeh. They were responding to their own unresolved family dynamics. What got lost entirely was intention. Did Nevaeh mean to spark drama, or did she simply want to correct a misconception? Did Karlissa mean to shut her down, or did she feel attacked by yet another public contradiction? Those questions didn't get answered because the internet had already decided who was right and who was wrong. Once those decisions are made, facts become optional. As the noise reached its loudest point, fatigue began to set in. The same arguments repeated themselves with slightly different wording. The same clips circulated with new captions. Outrage burned hot, then started to cool, not because anything was resolved, but because attention moved on. That's the cycle. Drama spikes, peaks, and then fades, leaving unresolved tension behind. By the end of this phase, one thing was clear. The situation had crossed the line from disagreement into spectacle. What could have been a quick clarification turned into a public clash that exposed cracks in family communication and the dangers of correcting narratives under a spotlight. The internet had gotten its entertainment, but the people involved were left to deal with the aftermath. And as the volume finally began to dip, the question shifted from who was right to what now. Because once something like this plays out publicly, it doesn't just disappear. It changes relationships, perceptions, and how every future word is interpreted. The tattoo drama had done its damage, and the consequences were just beginning to surface when the noise finally died down and the timeline found something new to argue about. What remained wasn't resolution. It was tension. The kind that doesn't disappear just because the comments slow down. This is the stage nobody glamorizes because it's quiet and comfortable and forces people to sit with what was said instead of how loud it was. For Karlissa and Nevaeh, the tattoo drama didn't end when the memes stopped. It settled into the background, reshaping dynamics in ways the internet will never fully see. The first noticeable shift was energy. Public interactions became more cautious, more measured. Like everyone suddenly realized how fragile every word becomes once it's released online. Silence replaced spontaneity, and that silence carried weight. Not peace, but awareness. The kind that comes after realizing how quickly something small can explode when millions are watching and waiting for the next spark. Karlissa's image took on sharper edges in public perception. To supporters, she looked protective, defensive of her family and fed up with constant misrepresentation. To critics, she looked controlling and willing to let anyone challenge the narrative without consequence. Both interpretations existed at the same time, clashing in comment sections long after the original issue stopped trending. That's the trap of public conflict. Once opinions solidify, they don't soften easily. Nevaeh, on the other hand, carried a different kind of fallout. Her comment, whether intended to clarify or not, became a defining moment. Suddenly, everything she said or didn't say was filtered through the lens of that one correction. Some people praised her honesty, framing her as someone unafraid to speak truth even when it's uncomfortable. Others questioned her judgment, arguing that family matters should never be corrected in public. Either way, her words echoed far louder than she may have anticipated. What made the aftermath especially complicated was the lack of closure. There was no clear sit-down, no public reconciliation, no moment where everyone agreed to move on. Instead, the story faded without resolution, leaving room for interpretation and resentment to grow quietly. Unfinished conversations are dangerous because they linger. They resurface later, often louder and messier than before. Behind the scenes, relationships felt the pressure. When disagreements play out publicly, they don't just end when the internet moves on. Trust shifts. Communication tightens. People second-guess what they say, not just to each other, but about each other. That kind of strain doesn't announce itself. It builds slowly, shaping how future interactions unfold. Public perception followed a predictable pattern. Sympathy cooled. Criticism sharpened. The internet, having consumed the drama, began to distance itself emotionally. That's how it always works. Viewers engage intensely, then detach completely, leaving the people involved to deal with the emotional residue. For Karlissa and Nevaeh, the spotlight dimmed, but the impact remained. The tattoo itself became almost irrelevant at this stage. It transformed from a specific detail into a symbol of something larger. Control versus correction. Authority versus autonomy. Who gets to speak, and who gets checked when they do? The original question of spelling was swallowed by deeper issues about voice and boundaries, issues that don't have simple answers. What stood out most in the aftermath was how familiar it all felt. This wasn't a new pattern. It was another example of how public families struggle to navigate private disagreements under constant observation. Every correction feels like an accusation. Every response feels like a power move. And once those dynamics set in, even neutral moments get charged with meaning. Labels began to stick, as they always do. Karlissa was described as extra or protective, depending on who was speaking. Nevaeh was framed as honest or messy, depending on perspective. Labels simplify complex situations, making them easier to consume and harder to resolve. Once applied, they follow people long after the moment that created them fades from memory. What the audience never sees is the emotional math happening behind the scenes. The weighing of words, the hesitation before speaking, the awareness that any statement, no matter how small, can become the next headline. That awareness changes how people communicate, often making everything more guarded and less authentic. It's the hidden cost of living publicly. As time passed, the drama became another entry in a long list of moments people reference without fully remembering. Remember the tattoo thing became shorthand for a larger conversation about family tension. That's how these moments live on, not in detail, but in reputation. They become part of the story people tell about you, whether you agree with it or not. The most uncomfortable truth is that nothing was truly resolved. The internet moved on, but the underlying issues didn't magically disappear. They just went quiet. And quiet issues have a habit of resurfacing when conditions are right. A comment, a live stream, another correction, another clap back. The cycle doesn't end unless someone decides to break it intentionally. In the end, this wasn't about spelling. It was about power, perception, and the danger of correcting narratives in public spaces where context gets stripped and emotion gets amplified. It was about how quickly family disagreements turn into entertainment, and how little room there is for nuance once the internet gets involved. Now let's talk real for a second. Because if a single tattoo comment can turn into a full-blown family firestorm, Imagine what else is sitting just below the surface waiting to explode. This wasn't just about spelling. This was about ego, loyalty, control, and who gets to correct the story when the whole world is watching. And if you made it this far, you already know this drama wasn't accidental. It was inevitable. So don't just sit there acting shocked. Jump into the comments and say it with your chest. Was Karlissa right to clap back and protect the narrative? Or should Nevaeh have been allowed to correct the record without backlash? Who crossed the line? And who do you think made it worse by going public? The comment section is where the real chaos lives. And trust me, the takes down there get way spicier than the headlines. And while you're here, smash that like button like it owes you money. Because every like tells the algorithm you want the truth behind the drama, not the watered-down PR version. Hit subscribe too, because stories like this don't end quietly. They resurface, remix themselves, and come back louder when you least expect it. Turn notifications on, because this channel doesn't wait for apologies or clean resolutions. We break down the mess while it's still unfolding, before narratives get rewritten and receipts start disappearing. New scandals drop constantly, and missing one is how you end up confused in the comments asking what happened. Remember this. In the world of celebrity drama, even the smallest detail can spark the biggest fallout. And when the next clapback hits, the next family tension leaks, or the next small comment turns into chaos, Celeb Sync is where everything connects first.